Does anyone remember Scalebound? You know, that one exclusive game that was supposed to be released on the Xbox One, but it got cancelled because Microsoft doesn't believe that exclusive games sell consoles. Well, they didn't say exactly that, instead they made up an excuse to cancel the game because people liked the previews and trailers too much? Well, I don't blame people for liking Scalebound. I do blame Microsoft for lying and killing off this interesting and potentially good game before it even got a chance. But I mean, seriously? How could we not have liked Scalebound? The premise till this day still sounds fantastic and the preview and trailers looked very promising. You would fight and fly across the sky with your own dragon and ultimately create a connection with it through interaction and story. So again, who would not want that? However, it was not the first game that sorta promised this, and one of those games have been on my radar ever since the cancellation of Scalebound. I am of course talking about Lair, which just like Scalebound comes with a lot of baggage. Lair is notorious for having terrible controls, and the people that I knew that played it all said the same thing as well. Don't play it because the controls are awful. This kept me away from Lair for a while and made me hesitant to jump in. But not that long ago, the game found its way into my collection, and of course, once that happened, it's not far away from being played. And you might ask the question right now, why? Why would you play a game that is known for not being good? And honestly, I don't really know. Maybe because one of my favorite videos to make was about taking a stand for a game that is considered to be bad by most. Or I just like torturing myself with playing bad games that grinds away my sanity. But what bothered me a lot is that every time when I talked about Lair, people seemed to be stuck solely on the bad controls and nothing else. Yet there must be more to a game than just controls, right? And that question is exactly why I wanted to play this game, because there is more to it than just controls, and maybe something good, but just overlooked. And with that mindset, I went into Lair. Now, if I found something good in there is the question, and there's only one way to find out. So without further ado, let's just jump in and see what Lair has in store for us. Long ago in the world of Lair, its people were united as one. But once the volcano started to erupt and destroy the land, people turned against each other out of fear. Eventually the people of this world split in two groups, one called the Moakai and the other one the Assailians. They dubbed this event as the Great Divide, and ever since then these two groups are at war. In this conflict you play as Roan, an Assailian sky guard, which is just a fancy title for someone who flies on dragons and fights other dragons. He believes that he is fighting to bring peace between the Moakai and the Assailians, however he learns fairly quickly that in war not everything is as it seems to be, and that achieving peace might come with a terrible cost. The world and story of Lair is definitely interesting and to some degree I would say even good. While we get only a quick history lesson at the start, you can see and feel there's more history as you play through the game. Especially the cities and buildings gave this feeling and I really liked their design. It reminded me a little bit of Shadow of the Colossus, though that reminder is not exclusive to just the buildings. Graphics wise, it also reminds me a lot of it. Lair is a game from 2007, which you can see, yet for the time it was pretty impressive, and even in today's world I still like these kind of graphics. But impressive graphics, even for that time, won't make your story or gameplay better. The introduction to Lair is great, but after that nothing is really done with it. Through the rest of the game, nothing really happens beyond the stage that is set in the introduction, nor are questions that you have about the world, events and characters answered. Characters, including the one you play as, are very one-dimensional and painfully forgettable. The only reason why I remember Roan is because he's the main character and I played as him. Though what really was a shame to me was that Lair's story tries to make a good and interesting point and commentary about war, yet fails to do so as it lacks important context about the world and the warring factions. So instead of building up the story, developing characters and showing more of the world, it just rushes towards the end to make an interesting but badly constructed point and comment about war. What is the biggest shame of this rushing behavior is that the dragons are sort of forgotten. During the story it's shown that there are some rules and connections between a rider and his dragon, yet we are never introduced to that properly, nor does it return anywhere else. I didn't really care for the dragon that I was fighting with and just saw it as a random creature I was using. Which is a shame as war creates strong bonds, and seeing such bonds grow between a human and a dragon would be cool, and this was the perfect stage to do it on. But Lair's story doesn't use any of this potential, resulting in a bland and obviously rushed feeling. It completely neglects and wastes its setup from the start, and it's just sad because the world is very interesting. Not only do we have dragons in it, but also other cool looking creatures like Taurus, war beasts, and even huge sea serpents. And the world also has a good history, 2 interesting factions, and the story even shows bits of diplomacy that should have been fleshed out more. It's all very interesting, but all used very poorly, resulting in a story that's just painfully mediocre at best. When it comes to games, I always like to see the weird, more unique side of things, and Lair has one of those sides. Factor 5, the developer, calls Lair controls Sixaxis motion controls, and this is what most players of the game have a problem with. Sixaxis motion controls basically means you control the dragon on screen by rotating your controller physically to the direction you want to go. Think like Mario Kart controls on the Wii or Switch, but instead of just going left and right, you can go every other direction as well. And yes, that type of control sounds very interesting. Motion controls itself is very common these days in gaming. However, around the time that Lair was released, motion controls were just in its early stages. Now, chances are you are familiar with Wii or Switch motion controls, which over the years got a lot better, but overall always worked pretty decently. This is because those consoles and controllers were designed for motion controls. The PlayStation 3 DualShock controller is not designed for motion controls, and Lair's idea of implementing this 6-axis motion controls suffered heavily because of that. Using these motion controls on the PlayStation 3 controller is frustrating and even a painful endeavor, even though the basics are very simple. You tilt the controller to where you want to go, and if you want to keep moving forward, you have to keep it leveled. Now, the further you tilt the controller to one direction, the faster your dragon moves to that direction. However, that is where the motion controls and the controller design starts to fight against you. First and foremost, the controller itself is just not designed to tilt sharply in any directions while holding it with both hands. Compare the PlayStation 3 controller to any other motion controller and you see exactly what I mean. Holding such a controller needs to be simple, minimalistic, but most importantly give you the freedom while moving, which the PlayStation 3 controller just doesn't do. You have to hold it with both hands, which are very close to each other, which makes small precision movements really hard. And because there's a lack of precision in the motion controls, you constantly have to make fast corrections and movements, which really takes a toll on your wrists. After 20 minutes they really started to hurt, and on top of that I was really getting frustrated as the gameplay did not complement the usage of these motion controls at all. Luckily, there is an option to switch to analog controls, however that does not fully solve the problem. In fact, it replaces one with another. Combat/flying is everything you do outside of watching cutscenes, which is either really cool or really painstakingly bland and annoying. As I mentioned before, you are a dragon rider and that's all you do in Lair. And while you don't really have a connection to your dragon, it's still pretty cool to fight with one, when it works. Many people say that the motion controls are the biggest problem in Lair, but I would personally say that the biggest problem in this game is area awareness. When flying, you want to be able to sorta know where you, your allies and enemies are on the battlefield. And on that end, Lair plays a tough game with you. Enemies nor allies are marked in any sort of way. There's a targeting system which does only target enemies, but that system only works on close range. So it does happen from time to time that you fly a long distance only to find out you are going after your allies. And getting a good overview of the overall battle is also hard in general as well, as camera movement is janky and odd. First of all, it's inverted for left and right, which is something I just couldn't get used to during my time with the game. But what is worse is that the camera movement is almost instantly. So instead of getting a better sense of your situation, you actually get even more disorientated because the camera rotates instantly to a direction you don't anticipate on. So for most of my playthrough, I tried to avoid using the camera manually and solely depend on the default camera that was offered. Yet at times the camera work actually connected really well with the gameplay and made it really cool. Whenever you are locked on an enemy, the camera focus switches. Now the focus of the camera is on the enemy instead of you, which gives a much better view in general. And it also makes you turn circles automatically around the enemy, which was very useful. Another cool thing was that whenever you grabbed ground units and threw them away, the camera followed them for a bit. Later I found out that I could actually aim these throws by this white circle. However, depending on the level, it was either really visible or almost invisible. And that brings me to another big problem. The game barely tells you anything. As you are flying around and fighting in the heat of battle, you actually have no clue how things are going for you. There are some vague dialogue lines shouted at you on what to do, but sometimes they shout things at you that you already did, which adds a lot of confusion. There's an arrow marker that points toward the right direction, which is a big help. Yet that arrow doesn't tell me if I'm losing the mission or that I need to do something specific. When you fail a mission and get a game over screen, the game tells you what went wrong and what you had to do, but it's still very vague about it. To give you an example, I was stuck at this one boss battle where I constantly jumped on its back, waiting for a QTE to pop up, which didn't happen, resulting in me dying twice to this boss, which in turn made me do the level completely from the start twice as well. So after a while and trying some more, I finally found out that it was a motion QTE that just didn't have a visual pop-up. Now, if the game over screen could have mentioned this, then everything would have been much easier and less frustrating. But what really annoyed me the most was probably the way they score your missions. At the end of every level, your performance gets rated on specific things you did, like killing enemies, overall score, time, etc. But there's no way for you to know what these objectives are going to be going into the level, nor can you find progress on them during the level. At first I cared about these ratings because it seemed you get bonuses like new combos and more health for performing better. But that would mean replaying every level at least a couple of times because I had no clue what my objectives were going to be the first time going into it. But because you can't check the progress on your objectives, you might complete the missions too early or too late because you're playing it too safe and therefore fail. And that means you have to play it again. And trust me, after a couple of times you're not looking forward to replay the same mission over and over. So after a couple of tries to improve my scores on the beginning levels, I decided that the best way to play this game is not to think too much about everything and hyper-focus on the objectives, and just enjoy the fighting. Because if we just set the mission, UI and camera issues aside, you will find a pretty decent fighting system. Your dragon has a basic fire attack and can spit long streams of fire that can easily decimate enemies on the ground. But where the fun really starts is when you enter these one-on-one fights with other dragons. Once you charge at an enemy, you have a chance to start one of these fights. Here you gotta fight clever and quickly by attacking the enemy with button combos, but also dodge and block any incoming damage, which you predict by the movement of the enemies. Or well, that is the idea. In practice it works kinda rocky. The screen is filled with lots and lots of visual effects and movement, which makes it hard to see the attack pattern of your enemy. Though this problem solved itself, as later on I memorized the most common 2 attack patterns, and from there taking out other dragons in these fights became a lot easier and even more fun. It's visually really cool though, and does give an awesome feeling when such fights starts. Now, just like everything, it is a bit inconsistent with its execution, as even here there are some clear flaws, but nonetheless, it works for most of the time and it's a fun idea which I really enjoyed. Another fun idea where the motion controls are actually used quite well are the QTEs. Once you get your anger/bonus meter filled up, you can choose to either slow down time and increase your damage, or charge an enemy dragon with a takedown attack. When you do one of these takedown attacks, you get around 3 QTE prompts, and if you succeed at them, you kill the enemy. I love these, even though QTEs are very basic and simple things. Yet that's exactly what I needed in a game like this, where a lot of things are very inconsistent or rocky. Now, some of these QTEs use motion controls, which just consist of moving the controller up and down or left to right, which are motions you can do with the PlayStation 3 controller, and therefore these motion controls work perfectly fine. Personally, I could not get enough of these QTEs, and I wish the game did more with it. Giving us levels where more QTEs are used and less flying around and just shooting everything you see would have been a nice addition and a nice change of pace for the game overall. But at this point I just took what I could get, which are these cool looking QTEs that also gave me a one-hit kill. And speaking of one-hit kills, the game's music is absolutely fantastic. It reminded me a bit of Lord of the Rings, but also Star Wars, which both are not bad things to be reminded of. I mean, listen to this. Lair's soundtrack is really nice, and it's probably my favorite thing in this game. Unfortunately, giving small bits of the soundtrack does not do it justice, nor could it save the game. But I highly recommend listening to the soundtrack whenever you got the time. So, is Lair really that bad of a game? Well, yeah, but not for the reasons it's remembered for. The motion controls are by far not the biggest issue, nor is it an actual issue, as you can swap to analog controls whenever you like. Still, the game is not particularly good, and I would not recommend it to most people. The motion controls are one of the many interesting elements this game has, and maybe it was just too far ahead of its time. Or it just picked the wrong console to release on, as the PlayStation 3 controller just wasn't built for these kind of things. But if we push the motion controls to the side, we discover that fundamentally there are some really big problems. Problems that unfortunately clip this game's wings too badly for a second chance. Developer Factor 5 went bankrupt only a couple of years after Lair's release, and well, it's been more than a decade now and we still haven't heard anything of Lair ever since. Nonetheless, despite its flaws, I don't regret playing it. Again, I like these weird, unique things in games, and Lair is packed with them. The ideas that are contained in this game are interesting, and it is just so sad that they didn't get developed further into something good. Still, I just love the ideas that are in this game, and I'm happy that I got the chance to experience them myself. Though I will admit, it's not a good game and gave me a big dosage of frustration and annoyances. Luckily, the experience is very short. It roughly took me 4.5 hours to complete the game, which is just enough to fill an afternoon. If it would have taken 20 hours or something like that, I would definitely look back on my experience differently and more negatively. But in the end, I would not consider Lair worth your time unless you are like me and really want to experience this oddball of a game. And that concludes my review of Lair. I hope it was useful to you. If you already played this game, see this review as a discussion starter. You might agree or disagree with me, and I would love to hear your thoughts on the game down below. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked this video, leave a like and consider subscribing. And with that all being said, I wish you a good day and until next time.